She thought I was excess cost. She didn't read Clause 19F carefully. I wrote it. 15 years keeping the company from exploding. I was fired by a CEO who liked to meditate on the conference table and forgot to turn on the sprinkler system. I left quietly. But when the boiler exploded and the insurance was suspended because my signature was missing, they realized I was the final safety system. My name is Madeline Cross. I'm 43 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was the risk management director at Briarton Industrial Solutions. For 15 years, I kept our chemical manufacturing facility safe through detailed protocols, risk assessments, and regular reviews. No major incidents, no fatalities, not even a serious injury. My team maintained a safety record that was the envy of the industry. People in manufacturing understand the value of what we do. When you're handling volatile chemicals and operating industrial equipment at extreme temperatures and pressures, safety isn't a luxury. It's what keeps people alive. It's what prevents communities from being evacuated. It's what saves the company from bankruptcy after a catastrophic failure. But to some people, safety is just a line item on a budget spreadsheet, just another expense to be minimized. I never expected to be fired. I certainly never expected to bring down a CEO. But I learned long ago that in the world of industrial risk management, you always need a backup plan. Mine was hiding in plain sight on page 74 of our insurance policy. The first time I met Corinne Stratton, I knew we were going to have problems. Our previous CEO, Harold Bennett, had retired after 27 years. Harold understood manufacturing. He'd started on the production floor and worked his way up. When the board brought in Corinne as his replacement, the rumors flew immediately. She was from a tech background, had never run a manufacturing operation, and was known for aggressive cost-cutting at her previous companies. I tried to keep an open mind. Change isn't always bad. New perspectives can be valuable. The company-wide introduction meeting was held in our largest conference room. Corinne walked in wearing an immaculate white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move when she turned her head. She had the confident smile of someone who had never made a serious mistake, or at least, had never been held accountable for one. "Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to join the Briarton family," she began, pacing the front of the room with the energy of a motivational speaker. "I've spent the last few weeks reviewing our operations, and I see so much potential here. We've been successful, but we can be exceptional." I nodded along. So far, so good. The market is changing, and we need to change with it. My vision is to transform Briarton from a traditional manufacturer into an agile, future-focused materials science innovator. She clicked to her next slide, showing a graph with our competitors' growth rates compared to ours. Ours was steady but unspectacular. We've been too cautious, too slow to adapt. That ends now. My mandate from the board is clear: accelerate growth, increase margins, and maximize shareholder value. The room was quiet. Most of our senior staff had been with the company for decades. They'd heard similar speeches before from consultants and executives who came and went. "I'll be implementing my strategic transformation plan over the next quarter. You'll all be hearing from me about how your departments fit into our new vision." Her eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on different faces. When she looked at me, I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Some of you will need to embrace significant change. Others may find that your roles no longer align with our new direction." Her smile never wavered. "But I promise you, the future of Briarton will be extraordinary." After the meeting, I introduced myself and invited her to tour our main production facility. I wanted to show her firsthand why our safety protocols mattered. "I'd love to," she said. "But my schedule is packed for the next few weeks. Send me your department overview and KPIs, and we'll find time to connect soon." I emailed her a comprehensive overview that same day. She never acknowledged receiving it. 2 weeks later, all department heads were summoned for individual meetings with Corinne and her newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, Desmond Walsh, another SAS veteran with no manufacturing experience. When my turn came, I walked into her office to find her sitting cross-legged on top of her desk, eyes closed. "Maiden Stratton," I said, unsure if I should interrupt. Her eyes opened. Madeline. Come in. I'm just finishing my mindfulness practice. She uncrossed her legs and slid gracefully off the desk. It helps me make clearer decisions. You should try it sometime. I'll keep that in mind, I said, taking a seat across from her. Desmond sat in the corner, typing on his laptop. He barely looked up. So, Corinne said, settling into her chair. Risk management, tell me what your team does on a daily basis. I outlined our responsibilities developing and updating safety protocols, conducting inspections, training employees, ensuring regulatory compliance, managing our insurance relationships, and preventing costly accidents. She nodded periodically but kept glancing at her phone. And how many people report to you? 12 directly. We have safety officers assigned to each production area, plus specialists in environmental compliance, insurance, and emergency response. That seems excessive for a company our size, she said, looking to Desmond, who nodded in agreement. Actually, we're understaffed compared to industry standards for a chemical manufacturer with our output and hazard profile, I countered. I've been requesting 2 additional safety technicians for the past year. Corinne raised an eyebrow. More headcount. That's not the direction we're headed. Madeline. She leaned forward. Let's talk about value. What's your department's contribution to the bottom line? We prevent disasters that would cost millions in damages, liability, and lost production. Last year alone, my team identified and addressed 23 high-risk conditions that could have resulted in serious incidents. But those are hypothetical savings, she said, making air quotes around hypothetical. I need concrete metrics. What's your ROI? Our insurance premiums have decreased 3 years running despite industry-wide increases. That's a direct saving of $1.7 million last year. And we haven't had a lost time accident in 37 months, which keeps our workers' comp costs well below industry average. She made a note. But your department costs us nearly $3 million annually in salaries and operations. Safety isn't just about financial ROI, I said, trying to keep my voice level. It's about protecting our people, our community, and our reputation. Everything has a price tag. Madeline, she replied with a thin smile. Even safety. The meeting ended shortly after that. As I left, I heard Desmond say, "Classic overhead defender. They never want to optimize." I should have seen it coming. I should have prepared better. The next blow came at the quarterly leadership meeting. Corinne presented her Brierton 2.0 strategy, which included a slide titled Streamlining Non-Revenue Operations. My department was at the top of the list. Our risk management practices are outdated and overbuilt, she announced to the room. We're spending millions on preventing scenarios that are statistically unlikely to occur. I raised my hand. With respect, in chemical manufacturing, even statistically unlikely events can be catastrophic when they do happen. That's why, Madeline, she interrupted. I appreciate your passion, but this isn't a debate. I've reviewed the data with outside consultants, and we're implementing a more efficient approach to risk. What consultants? I asked. No one has spoken with my team. We engaged Efficiency Corp to benchmark our operations against industry standards. She clicked to her next slide. They identified significant redundancies in your area. Efficiency Corp. I knew them by reputation, a cost-cutting firm that specialized in telling executives what they wanted to hear. Their analysis shows we can reduce safety personnel by 40% while maintaining adequate coverage through automation and streamlined protocols. Several of my colleagues looked uncomfortable. They understood what adequate coverage might mean in practice. Furthermore, Corinne continued, Madeline's drills and emergency exercises are excessive. Last quarter's evacuation drill lasted 90 minutes. That's 90 minutes of lost production time across the entire facility. That drill revealed 3 critical gaps in our emergency response, I countered. We identified that the East Wing evacuation route was blocked by new equipment. 2 emergency showers weren't functioning properly. And our headcount procedure missed 2 contractors. And that's exactly my point, she said with a dismissive wave. Your scenarios are elaborate performances that disrupt operations. Your emergency response manual is longer than a symphony." The room filled with uncomfortable laughter. I felt my face flush. Going forward, all safety drills will be limited to 30 minutes, conducted during scheduled downtime, and approved by operations first. I wrote a detailed email that evening expressing my concerns about the proposed changes. I copied the entire leadership team and the board's risk committee. Only our HR director, Thomas Nguyen, responded with a brief, "Let's discuss this offline." When we met the next day, Thomas looked stressed. "Madeline, I understand your concerns, but Corinne has the board's full support. They recruited her specifically to increase profitability. By cutting corners on safety, that's not just unethical, it's dangerous and potentially illegal." Thomas sighed. "Look, I'm on your side, but my advice is to find a way to work with her, adapt to the new direction. Even if that direction puts people at risk." He didn't answer directly. "Just document everything for your own protection." I took his advice seriously. I began keeping meticulous records of every safety recommendation that was denied, every inspection that was shortened, every maintenance request that was delayed. I recorded conversations when legal, saved emails, and documented changes to protocols. I didn't know exactly how I would use this information. I just knew I needed to protect myself and potentially others. A week later, I was called into a meeting with Corinne, Desmond, and Thomas. The atmosphere was tense as I entered the room. "Madeline," Corinne began without preamble, "as part of our organizational restructuring, we're eliminating the risk management director position." My stomach dropped, but I wasn't entirely surprised. "Your responsibilities will be distributed among operations managers, with Desmond overseeing safety compliance at the executive level." Desmond, who couldn't tell a pressure relief valve from a garden hose. "This is effective immediately. Thomas will walk you through the separation details." "And my team?" I asked. "We're retaining 4 safety officers. The rest of the positions have been eliminated." 8 people gone, just like that. People with families, mortgages, specialized skills that might not easily transfer to other industries. "You can't do this," I said quietly. "It's not safe. It's not legal." Corinne's smile tightened. "Our legal team has reviewed all changes. We'll remain in full compliance with OSHA regulations. Minimum compliance, the bare legal requirement, not what was needed for actual safety in our high-risk environment." "You're making a mistake," I said. "Our facility has specific hazards that require specialized knowledge, and your tendency to catastrophize is exactly why this change is necessary." Corinne interrupted. "We need practical risk management, not constant doomsday scenarios." I looked at Thomas, who avoided my eyes. "You have until the end of the day to clear out your office," Corinne continued. "Security will escort you out." "That's not necessary," I said. "I've been here 15 years. I'm not going to—" "It's company policy for terminated executives," she said firmly. "Nothing personal." Everything about this was personal. Thomas led me to his office to review my severance package. 1 month's salary for each year of service, 6 months of health insurance continuation, and a non-disclosure agreement. "Don't sign anything today," he advised quietly. "Take it home, review it carefully." As I packed my office under the watchful eye of a security guard, I felt numb. 15 years of work, relationships, and institutional knowledge dismissed as unnecessary overhead. I carefully packed my personal items, family photos, the safety awards my team had won. But I also took something else, a copy of our comprehensive insurance policy that I had personally negotiated the previous year. Specifically, I took the original signed version with Clause 19F, a provision I had added during renewal negotiations with surprisingly little resistance from our insurers. It stated that any material changes to our established safety protocols required written approval from the risk management director, me, or the policy's coverage could be voided for affected areas. The insurance company had accepted it because we had an excellent safety record, and they knew I was thorough. The company's legal team had approved it because no one actually reads the fine print of a 200-page insurance policy. It was my insurance policy against exactly this scenario. As I was escorted out of the building, carrying my box of belongings. I passed several of my colleagues. Some looked away awkwardly. Others gave me sympathetic glances. My administrative assistant, Rena, was crying quietly at her desk. Outside, in the parking lot, I placed the box in my trunk and looked back at the facility where I'd spent nearly a third of my life. The massive storage tanks, the network of pipes, the cooling towers, all containing materials that, if mishandled, could cause devastating harm. I had always protected this place. Now I couldn't anymore. Or maybe I still could, just not in the way I'd planned. The first few days after being fired were surreal. I'd never had unscheduled time off. For 15 years, my days had been structured around meetings, inspections, and reports. Now I found myself adrift, sleeping until 9 a.m., still waking up with a jolt of anxiety before remembering I had nowhere to be. I reviewed my severance package carefully. The non-disclosure agreement was broad but standard. I couldn't share confidential company information or disparage Briarton publicly. Nothing in it prevented me from reporting safety violations to regulatory agencies, though that right was protected by federal law and couldn't be signed away. I considered filing a wrongful termination lawsuit, but my attorney advised against it. They'll argue business necessity and reorganization. Unless you have clear evidence they fired you for raising safety concerns, it's your word against theirs. I did have evidence, my documentation of denied safety recommendations and Corinne's dismissive comments, but a lawsuit would be expensive, lengthy, and emotionally draining, with no guarantee of success. Instead, I decided to wait and watch. I still had contacts at Briarton who would keep me informed about changes. And I had Clause 19F. I signed the severance agreement, deposited the first check, and began updating my resume. Life had to go on. 3 weeks after my termination, Briarton issued a press release announcing the opening of a new production facility in Edgevale, a small town 30 miles away. They were renovating an old manufacturing plant to expand capacity for their new line of industrial adhesives. The facility they were converting had been shut down years ago due to environmental concerns. I remembered reviewing it as a potential acquisition 2 years earlier and recommending against it because of the extensive remediation it would require. Apparently, Corinne had other ideas. That same week, I received a call from Marco, one of the safety officers who had survived the cuts. He was speaking quietly, obviously somewhere private. "Madeline, it's a disaster here. They've halved the maintenance budget, extended equipment inspection intervals, and canceled half our safety training programs." "Are they documenting these changes?" I asked. "Desmond's calling it protocol optimization. They're rewriting all your procedures to be more efficient." I could hear the air quotes in his voice. "What about the Edgevale facility?" He sighed heavily. "They're rushing it, planning to have it operational in 3 months, which is insane given the condition of that place. And guess what? I'm the only safety person assigned to it. Me, part-time, with my regular duties at the main plant too." "That's not possible," I said. "That facility needs a complete hazard assessment, new emergency response plans, extensive training." "I know," he interrupted. "But Corinne says we're being agile and will iterate on safety protocols as we go." Startup jargon applied to chemical manufacturing. A recipe for disaster. "What about the X-47 boiler unit?" I asked. This was a particularly troublesome piece of equipment that I had flagged for replacement multiple times. It was old, temperamental, and operating near its design limits. "Still running. Maintenance was supposed to replace the pressure relief valve last month, but the parts order was delayed due to budget approval." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my coffee. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of Briarton completely, find a new job, move forward. They weren't my responsibility anymore. But I kept thinking about the people still working there, the community surrounding our facilities, the potential consequences of Corinne's recklessness. I pulled out my copy of the insurance policy and reread Clause 19F carefully. Any material modification to establish safety protocols, emergency response procedures, or risk management practices as documented in Appendix C must be approved in writing by the Chief Risk Officer or Risk Management Director. Failure to obtain such approval may result in suspension of coverage for claims arising from areas affected by unapproved modifications. It was solid. I had made sure of that. The question was, would I need to use it? I hoped not. I genuinely hoped Corinne would come to her senses before something went wrong, or that the board would recognize the dangers of her approach, or that regulators would step in. But hope is not a strategy in risk management. So I prepared. I organized my documentation. I established confidential communication channels with Marco and 2 other former team members who were still at Briarton. And I waited. I didn't have to wait long. Exactly 1 month after my termination, at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, I received a text from Marco, X47 just blew, 3 injured. Bad. 17 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Thomas from HR's. Madeline, he said, his voice strained. We need your help. There's been an incident. The X47 boiler, I said. I heard. A pause. How did you never mind? Yes, the boiler failed, catastrophically. 3 workers have been taken to the hospital. 1 is critical. What happened to the maintenance schedule I established the quarterly valve inspections? The pressure monitoring system I requisitioned last year? Another pause. I don't know all the details, but that's not why I'm calling. Our insurance company is asking questions. They're reviewing our policy and have some concerns about recent operational changes. Let me guess, Clause 19F. You know about that. He sounded surprised. I wrote it. Thomas, it was my job to know every detail of our coverage. He was quiet for a moment. They're saying they might not cover the damages because these changes weren't approved by you. They weren't, I confirmed. No one consulted me about any changes after my termination. Madeline, this is serious. Initial estimates put the damage at over $4 million plus potential liability for the injuries. Possible regulatory fines. I'm aware of how serious industrial accidents are. Thomas, I spent 15 years trying to prevent them. We need you to sign off on the changes retroactively. The insurance company said they'll process the claim if you provide written approval. I let his request hang in the air for a moment. Madeline, are you there? I'm here. I'm just considering your request. We can compensate you for your time, of course. It's not about compensation, Thomas. It's about responsibility. If I approve these changes, I'm saying they were safe and appropriate. I'm putting my professional reputation behind them. I understand, but were they safe and appropriate? Thomas, the changes that led to this accident? He didn't answer. I need to see documentation of all protocol modifications made since my departure. I need to review the preliminary accident investigation. I need to speak with the injured workers. If they're able, then I'll make my decision. Corinne won't agree to that. She's already saying this was just an unfortunate mechanical failure, not related to any procedural changes. Then I can't help you, I said simply. Madeline, please. People are hurt. The company could face serious financial consequences. Yes, that's what happens when safety becomes an unnecessary expense. I ended the call, feeling a complex mix of emotions, vindication, yes, but also sadness and anger. People were injured because of Corinne's arrogance and short-sightedness. The accident I had warned about had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Meeting happening now. C is freaking out about insurance, blaming maintenance team. Of course she was. Leaders like Corinne never accept responsibility when things go wrong. I called our insurance agent, James Petrosky, directly. We had worked together for years and had a good professional relationship. James, it's Madeline Cross. I understand there's been an incident at Briarton. Madeline. Yes, we're just beginning our investigation. Complex situation. He was being careful with his words. I've been contacted about Clause 19F. I said, I want to clarify that I have not approved any changes to safety protocols since my departure from Briarton. That's my understanding as well, he said, which puts us in a difficult position regarding coverage. I want to do the right thing here, James. I'm not looking to punish the company or deny coverage out of spite. but I need to understand exactly what changes were made and how they contributed to this incident. That's reasonable, he said. I'll send you what we have so far. But, Madeline, off the record. The preliminary information doesn't look good. Major deviations from established protocols. Documented warnings ignored. Maintenance deferrals that wouldn't meet even basic industry standards. I suspected as much, I said. Keep me informed. I'll review whatever you send. Over the next 48 hours, I received a flurry of communications. Emails from Thomas and Briarton's legal counsel urging me to approve the changes. A formal letter from James detailing the insurance company's position. Text from Marco with updates from inside. The most revealing was a detailed incident report compiled by the insurance company's investigators. It confirmed my worst fears: the X-47 boiler had failed because the pressure relief valve, the one I had flagged for replacement, had malfunctioned. Maintenance records showed the replacement had been deferred due to budget constraints. The automated monitoring system that should have provided early warning had been temporarily disabled during system upgrades. 3 workers were injured, 1 severely, because Corinne Stratton had decided safety protocols were too expensive and cumbersome. The report also included something I hadn't expected: a copy of an email from Corinne to Desmond, dated 2 weeks after my termination. That read, "These safety procedures are ridiculously overcomplicated. Madeline was clearly empire building. Simplify everything by 50% and let's stop wasting money on hypothetical disasters." My hands shook as I read it, not from anger, but from the cold confirmation of what I had suspected all along. My concerns, my expertise, my professional judgment all had been dismissed as empire building. That evening, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Corinne Stratton standing on my porch, looking considerably less polished than when I'd last seen her. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled. "Madeline," she said with a tight smile. "May I come in? We need to talk." I considered refusing, but curiosity won out. I stepped aside. She walked into my living room, glancing around at my modest home. "Lovely place," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "What can I do for you, Corinne?" I asked, not offering her a seat. She remained standing, clutching her designer handbag. "I'll get straight to the point. This insurance situation is creating unnecessary complications for Briarton. We need you to sign off on the operational changes so we can move forward." "Unnecessary complications," I repeated. "Is that what you call 3 injured workers and millions in damages?" Her expression hardened. "That was an unfortunate mechanical failure that could have happened at any time. It happened because you ignored my repeated warnings about that specific equipment, because you cut the maintenance budget, because you dismantled the safety systems I put in place." "That's your interpretation," she said dismissively. "Our technical team has a different assessment." The insurance investigators seemed to agree with my interpretation. She waved a hand impatiently. "That's why I'm here. This clause in our policy, it's creating a needless bureaucratic hurdle. Sign the approval, and we can all move on. You'll be compensated, of course." "How much are you offering?" She looked relieved. $50,000 as a consulting fee. For about 10 minutes of your time to sign a document. I laughed. I couldn't help it. 50,000? That's what you think my professional integrity is worth. Her smile disappeared. It's a generous offer for a simple signature. To falsely certify that dangerous changes were safe. To take legal responsibility for decisions I opposed. To potentially be liable if when something else goes wrong. "Nothing else will go wrong," she said firmly. Like nothing would go wrong with the X-47 boiler. She took a deep breath. "Madeline, let's be practical. The company needs this insurance payout. People's jobs could be at stake. You should have thought about that before you decided safety was an unnecessary expense." "What do you want?" she demanded, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "More money, a consulting contract. Your old job back, just name it." I looked at her for a long moment. "I want you to reinstate all the safety protocols you eliminated. I want you to double the maintenance budget you cut. I want you to hire back every safety officer you fired. I want a full, independent safety audit of all facilities. including Edgevale. And I want a written admission that these changes directly contributed to the accident. Her face flushed with anger. That's absurd. The board would never approve. Then we have nothing more to discuss, I said, moving toward the door. Good evening, Corinne. You'll regret this, she said, following me. You're being vindictive at the expense of the entire company. No, I corrected her. I'm upholding the safety standards that you dismantled. There's a difference. After she left, I sat down and drafted an email to James at the insurance company, with copies to Thomas, Briarton's legal counsel, and 2 members of the board's risk committee whom I knew personally. In it, I detailed why I could not approve the changes retroactively. They violated industry standards, ignored known hazards, and directly contributed to a serious accident. I attached documentation of my previous warnings about the X-47 boiler and my recommendations for its maintenance and monitoring. I concluded, as the former risk management director for Briarton Industrial Solutions, I cannot in good conscience approve changes that compromise safety, violated our established protocols, and resulted in preventable injuries. My professional ethics and responsibility to worker safety preclude me from providing the requested retroactive approval. While I regret the financial impact this may have on the company, I believe the responsibility lies with those who made and implemented these dangerous decisions despite clear warnings. I hit send and waited for the fallout. It came quickly. The next morning, I received a formal letter from Briarton's attorneys threatening legal action for interfering with business relationships and breach of confidentiality. It was a bluff. I had disclosed no confidential information, only my professional assessment of safety changes. Later that day, Marco texted that an emergency board meeting had been called. Corinne was on the warpath, blaming everyone but herself for the situation. 2 days later, the local newspaper ran a small story about the accident, noting that 3 workers had been injured and that production had been halted pending investigation. The article mentioned in passing that the company's insurance claim was under review, but gave no further details. That might have been the end of it, a minor local news story quickly forgotten if not for what happened next. One of the injured workers, Miguel Sanchez, gave an interview to a local reporter. He described how warnings about the boiler had been ignored, how safety drills had been eliminated, how experienced safety personnel had been replaced by untrained managers. The story was picked up by a regional business journal, which ran a more in-depth piece questioning Briarton's management practices. Meanwhile, the insurance company formally denied the claim, citing Clause 19F and the unauthorized safety changes. This triggered a disclosure requirement to shareholders, as the financial impact was material to the company's quarterly results. Analysts began asking questions. Why had experienced safety personnel been terminated? Why had maintenance been deferred on critical equipment? Why had the board approved such changes in a high-risk industry? Briarton's stock price began to slip. Then came the regulatory response. OSHA launched an investigation based on the reported injuries and the public allegations of safety violations. The EPA followed, concerned about potential environmental impacts from the accident. A week after the accident, I received another call from Thomas. "It's getting ugly, Madeline," he said, sounding exhausted. "Corinne is trying to blame the maintenance team, but they have documentation showing their requests for parts and repairs were denied. The board is asking questions she can't answer." "What about the workers?" I asked. "How are they doing?" "Miguel and Javier are recovering. Luis is still in serious condition. His family has hired an attorney. And the Edgevale facility, on hold, thankfully. The board has suspended all expansion plans until this is resolved." "Good," I said. "At least something positive is coming from this." "Madeline," he hesitated. "Some board members are asking about you, about why you left, what your concerns were. I think they're realizing they didn't get the full story. They could have asked those questions when I was fired, or when I sent that detailed email outlining my concerns." "I know. They should have." He paused again. "Would you be willing to speak with them just to explain your perspective on the safety issues?" I considered it. "I'd need some assurances first. No legal threats, no NDAs, And I speak to the full board, not just a committee. I'll see what I can arrange, he promised. 2 days later, I received a formal invitation to address the board at their emergency meeting the following week. The letter came from the board chair, not Corinne, and included an assurance that my presentation would be received in the spirit of full and open communication, without prejudice or legal repercussions. I spent the weekend preparing my presentation. I compiled data on industry safety standards, our historical performance, the specific warnings I'd issued about the X-47 boiler, and the changes implemented after my departure. I was meticulous, factual, and professional, not emotional or accusatory. On the day of the meeting, I arrived at Briarton's headquarters for the first time since being escorted out 6 weeks earlier. The security guard at the front desk, who had known me for years, looked uncomfortable as he handed me a visitor badge. "Good to see you, Ms. Cross," he said quietly. "We miss your safety talks." Thomas met me in the lobby and escorted me to the boardroom. "Just so you know," he said in a low voice, "there's a lot of tension. Corinne has been telling the board this is all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion." "The facts will speak for themselves," I replied. When we entered the boardroom, all conversation stopped. The board members, 10 in total, sat around the massive table. Corinne was at one end, looking tense but composed. Several executives, including Desmond, were seated along the wall. And surprisingly, a video camera had been set up in the corner. "This is being recorded?" I asked. The board chair, Eleanor Wright, nodded. "For our records, given the seriousness of the situation, do you object?" "Not at all," I said. "I prefer to have my statements documented accurately." I set up my laptop and began my presentation. For 30 minutes, I laid out the facts methodically, the safety protocols that had been eliminated, the maintenance that had been deferred, the warnings that had been ignored, the direct line between these decisions and the accident. I concluded, the X-47 boiler explosion was not a random mechanical failure. It was the predictable result of systematic safety degradation implemented after my termination. Similar risks exist throughout the facility and will almost certainly result in additional incidents if the current approach continues. When I finished, the room was silent. Several board members were taking notes. One was shaking his head slowly. Eleanor spoke first. "Thank you for your thorough presentation, Ms. Cross. We appreciate your professionalism." She turned to Corinne. "Ms. Stratton, would you like to respond?" Corinne stood, smoothing her skirt. "Gladly. While I respect Ms. Cross's long service to Briarton, her assessment is colored by personal bias after her position was eliminated. The changes we implemented were based on modern risk management practices, not the overly cautious approach of the past." She clicked to her own presentation, showing charts and graphs. "Our safety protocols were excessive compared to industry benchmarks. We simply aligned them with standard practices while improving operational efficiency." She continued for several minutes, using phrases like acceptable risk parameters and optimal safety cost balance. It was smooth, practiced, corporate speak, designed to sound reasonable. But the board wasn't buying it. When she finished, the questions began. "Ms. Stratton," said one board member, "if these changes were within acceptable risk parameters, why did the insurance company cite them as grounds for denying our claim?" "That's a technical dispute based on contract interpretation," she replied smoothly. "Our legal team is addressing it." "Ms. Cross," said another board member, turning to me, "in your professional opinion, were the modified protocols consistent with industry standards for a chemical manufacturer of our type?" "No," I said firmly. "They were not. They fell below minimum recommended guidelines from the Chemical Safety Board, API, and NFPA." The questions continued for nearly an hour. The more Corinne spoke, the more defensive she became. She began blaming others, the maintenance team, the safety officers who remained, even the injured workers themselves for procedural non-compliance. Finally, Eleanor turned to me. "Ms. Cross, there's one issue we haven't addressed directly. Clause 19F of our insurance policy. which requires your approval for safety changes. Were you aware of this clause when you left the company? I met her gaze steadily. Yes, I was. I added it during our last policy renewal. May I ask why? Because I foresaw a scenario where safety protocols might be compromised after my departure. I wanted to ensure there would be consequences if that happened. Corinne stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. She deliberately created a booby trap in our insurance policy and is now using it to extort the company. It's not a booby trap, I replied calmly. It's a safeguard, one that would never have been triggered if you had maintained appropriate safety standards. The board approved my strategy, Corinne insisted. We all agreed these changes were necessary for the company's future. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. The board approved a strategic transformation plan, Ms. Stratton. We were not informed of specific safety protocol changes or maintenance deferrals that violated industry standards. It was all in the documentation provided to you, Corinne insisted, buried in appendices and technical language that obscured their significance, countered another board member. We rely on our executives to highlight material risks. The mood in the room had shifted palpably. Corinne seemed to sense it too. Her confident demeanor was cracking. This is a temporary setback, she insisted. Once we resolve the insurance issue. Which brings us back to the immediate problem. Eleanor interrupted. Ms. Cross, what would it take for you to approve these changes retroactively so our insurance claim can proceed? All eyes turned to me. This was the moment I had prepared for. I cannot approve changes that I know to be dangerous and that have already resulted in injuries. I said, my professional ethics won't allow it. We understand your position, Eleanor said. But surely there's some compromise possible. The financial impact of a denied claim would affect everyone at Briarton, including the workers you care about protecting. I'm aware of that, I acknowledged, which is why I'm prepared to offer an alternative solution. I opened a folder and removed a document I had prepared. This is my assessment of the minimum safety measures that would need to be reinstated immediately to bring Briarton back into compliance with industry standards. It includes rehiring key safety personnel, restoring critical maintenance schedules, and implementing proper oversight for the Edgevale expansion. I handed copies to Eleanor and the board secretary. If the board commits to implementing these measures verified by an independent safety audit, I would be willing to work with the insurance company on a compromise regarding the current claim. Eleanor reviewed the document thoughtfully. These are substantial changes from our current operations. They're necessary changes, I said, not just for insurance purposes, but for worker safety and regulatory compliance. Corinne was reading over Eleanor's shoulder, her face darkening. This is a complete repudiation of my strategic plan. It would add millions in unnecessary costs and delay our expansion indefinitely. It would prevent future accidents, injuries, and deaths. I countered. It would restore our insurance coverage, and it would bring us back into compliance with regulations before OSHA forces the issue with fines and potential facility closures. The board members looked at each other. I could see them weighing the options. We need to discuss this privately. Eleanor finally said, Ms. Cross, would you mind stepping out while we deliberate? I gathered my materials. Of course, thank you for hearing me out. As I turned to leave, Corinne suddenly stepped forward. Wait, there's one thing I don't understand. Her voice was tight with suppressed anger. If you were so concerned about safety, why didn't you raise these issues more forcefully when you were here? Why hide behind an insurance clause instead of fighting harder? I looked at her steadily. I did fight. I sent emails. I wrote reports. I raised concerns in meetings. You dismissed them all. You called me catastrophic and empire building. You decided that safety was an unnecessary expense. So this is revenge, she said, her voice rising. You're punishing me because I eliminated your position. No, I said quietly. This isn't about me or you. It's about protecting people who depend on their workplace being safe. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. I walked out, leaving Corinne staring after me. Thomas was waiting in the hallway. How did it go? he asked anxiously. As well as could be expected, I said. The board seemed receptive. Corinne, not so much. He nodded. Not surprising. She's been under enormous pressure. The stock is down 15% since the accident. Analysts are questioning her leadership, and now the workers are talking about unionizing. We sat in a small conference room while the board deliberated. Thomas kept checking his phone for updates from inside. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, the boardroom door opened and Eleanor's assistant appeared. Ms. Cross, the board would like you to rejoin them. When I re-entered, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Several board members looked grim. Corinne sat rigid in her chair, her face pale. Desmond was gone. Eleanor gestured for me to sit. Ms. Cross, we've had a frank discussion about the situation. The board has decided to accept your proposed safety measures in full. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. That's the right decision. Thank you. Additionally, she continued, we would like to offer you a position as special advisor on safety compliance to oversee the implementation of these changes and help restore our relationship with the insurance company. That I hadn't expected. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure returning to Briarton is the right move for me at this point. We understand, Eleanor said. The role would be temporary, 6 months maximum with no reporting relationship to current management. You would report directly to the board's risk committee. I considered it. The offer was tempting. A chance to restore the safety systems I had built. To protect the workers I had known for years. To finish what I had started. But then Corinne spoke, her voice cold. Before you make any decisions, I think we need to address the insurance claim directly. She turned to me. Will you sign off on the existing claim, Ms. Cross? These workers need their medical expenses covered now, not after months of safety audits. It was a calculated move, trying to make me look heartless if I refused, but I was prepared. I can't approve changes I know to be dangerous, I repeated. But I have spoken with James at the insurance company. He believes they would consider an immediate partial payment for the workers' medical expenses if the board commits to implementing these safety measures and permits a full audit of the facility. Eleanor nodded. We've already authorized our legal team to pursue that option. Corinne stood suddenly. This is ridiculous. You're letting her dictate terms to us because of one clause in an insurance policy that she manipulated into existence. Ms. Stratton, Eleanor said sharply, the board has made its decision. Based on what her unsubstantiated claims, her vendetta against me because I eliminated her unnecessary position. Based on the facts, Eleanor replied firmly. The accident, the injuries, the insurance denial, the regulatory investigations, and most importantly, the documentation that Ms. Cross and others have provided showing that you systematically dismantled critical safety protocols despite explicit warnings about the risks. Corinne looked around the table, seeking allies, but found none. So that's it. You're capitulating to her demands and undermining my authority as CEO. Eleanor's expression was granite. The board has lost confidence in your judgment, Ms. Stratton. We believe your decisions created unacceptable risks to our workers and our business. The room went silent. Corinne stared at Eleanor in disbelief. You're firing me, she finally managed. We're requesting your resignation, effective immediately. Eleanor confirmed. If you choose not to resign, the board will vote to terminate your employment for cause. Corinne's composure finally broke. This is all because of her. She pointed at me accusingly. She set this up from the beginning. That insurance clause was a trap. No, I said calmly. The clause was protection against exactly what happened, someone prioritizing short-term profits over safety. If you had maintained appropriate safety standards, it would never have been an issue. You can't do this, Corinne said, turning back to the board. Your contract includes provisions regarding compliance with regulatory requirements and maintaining appropriate risk management practices. Eleanor interrupted. Our legal team has confirmed we have grounds for termination with cause. Corinne looked around the room once more, then grabbed her laptop and purse. You'll be hearing from my attorneys, she said, and stormed out. The room exhaled collectively after she left. Eleanor turned to me. That was unpleasant but necessary. Now, Ms. Cross, about our offer. I need time to consider it, I said. This has been a lot to process. Of course, she agreed. Take a few days, but we would very much like you to help us correct course. After a few more minutes of discussion, the meeting concluded. As I packed up my materials, I realized the video camera was still recording. Should I turn that off? I asked, pointing to it. Eleanor glanced at it. Oh, yes. Thank you. We wanted to ensure we had a complete record of the discussions. As I walked out of the boardroom for the second time that day, my feelings were complicated. I hadn't wanted Corinne to be fired. I had wanted her to understand why safety mattered and to change her approach. But perhaps that had been naive. Some people never learn until it's too late. Thomas walked me to the elevator. That was impressive, he said. I've never seen a board meeting like that. I haven't either, I admitted. Will you take their offer? I don't know yet, I said honestly. I need to think about it. As the elevator doors opened, Thomas said, Whatever you decide, you did the right thing, Madeline. You stood up for what matters. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Outside, in the parking lot, I paused to look back at the facility once more. The same massive tanks, the same network of pipes, the same cooling towers. But something had changed. A wrong had been righted. Safety would be prioritized again. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from a competing chemical manufacturer in the next state, an offer for a senior risk management position with a substantial salary increase. I smiled. I had options now. Good ones. Maybe I would help Briarton rebuild its safety culture. Maybe I would take this new opportunity. Either way, I had stayed true to my principles. I had protected the workers. I had done my job, even after they told me it wasn't needed anymore. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the vindication, not Corinne's downfall, but the knowledge that I had done what was right, even when it was difficult. Because in risk management, as in life, the real catastrophes happen not when equipment fails, but when people fail to stand up for what they know is right.